Oh, yes. Start me up. We have another very exciting edition of the Business Buzz. We have a special guest, Tom Avitabile from New York City, a multi-talented individual and the quintessential multi-career and multi-interest person. Tom, welcome to the show. And I know I screwed your last name up, so why don't you say that again?
Well, in the Bronx, they used to say Avitabile, but now we say Avitabile because we've become, cosmopolitan.
Excellent, as you are. Now, you are a engineer, a advertising executive, a producer of both advertising and documentaries. You're working on a couple of movies that are basically being in the proposal stage. And you're also a author with a book in the works. Is that correct?
Sounds like a guy who can't keep a job.
I hear you. And I think I left out one thing. You're now also working on an exciting band, part of a band that just released a CD. That's also correct, right?
That's true. Yeah, we've had a little bit of buzz on our CD, as like you do with Business Buzz, and it's really catching on. It's maybe it's something I think we discussed. Everything old is new again. It's a little retro, and it seems like it's catching a younger audience. So who knows? So
it's kind of like a morph between like traditional surfing music, but you have another name for it. What's that?
Well, it certainly owes its roots to surf, but it's really contemporary instrumental. Which, if you look at all the radio play charts, there's really no section for contemporary instrumental. It's either the Ventures or Mancini. Mm-hmm. And we steal liberally from both.
Very good, as all music does. And we'll talk a little bit about that music venture later on in the show. So, Tom, how did it all start? You're working in an ad agency in New York City, working on some extremely exciting advertisements. Is it primarily TV, or do you do print as well?
Actually, I'm more broadcast-based.
Broadcast-based.
Yeah, the print is. I get involved with print when we're looking at the total campaign. Mm-hmm. But when I do the majority of my work, it's all broadcast, whether it's television, radio, internet, anything that needs production usually.
Mm-hmm. So you're doing that now. Now, there always has to be a point of origin. How'd this all start? How'd you get into the ad business, the documentary business, and writer and all the other stuff we'll talk about?
Well, I've been very lucky. All my life I've been able to make money, and a lot of money, just on my ideas. And there are a few avenues that get your idea out to the public or get it out to where it needs to go as fast as broadcast or film or television or radio. So I've been very lucky to be in that modality. And it started, I guess, for me with a love of engineering and science as I was a child. I built a computer when I was a kid. We're going back to 1967 now. And I built it.
How heavy was it?
Actually, it was. It fit in an attaché case. I made it out of masonite. Mm-hmm. As the circuit boards, drilled my own circuit board. So it was probably about. It's a lot lighter than the computer I'm handling now because my back is hurting from my laptop and everything I carry around now. I guess it was about 7 pounds, mm-hmm. And it didn't have a screen or anything. It was a basic demonstrator of the binary system, but it had flip flops. And it had a way to create a transfer between the decimal system and the binary system, and that was and I added to it sequential access and random access and all these.
All the things I don't understand. So we'll just. It was a good computer, and
more than that, it was a golden key. That computer got me tracked by IBM. Got me a place on the list to go to MIT. Mm-hmm. It also, through another inadvertent wonderful moment, got me a job at NBC when I was 14 years old. And that's where I really started to understand about entertainment, mass media, and the reach. And at 14 years old, I was working at the National Broadcasting System.
You're kind of bumming me out. I was 14. I was playing tackle football and working on my banana bike. But, hey, what can you do?
Well, tackle football didn't work in a concrete schoolyard. No. You learned that in the first tackle. And then it was two-hand touch after that.
I guess that's one of the advantages of Connecticut. Now, you mentioned that you've been successful. You've made money on these ideas. And I've interviewed many people, some very successful and others that are more struggling. And I think the common differentiator is that many people have good ideas, but it's that belief that, gee, this is a good idea and it's worthy of taking it to the next step. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I think whenever you talk to someone, there's another modality of communications going on, and there's a connection between people. And I think there are telltales in your phraseology. There are telltales in the way you put your words together. That even though they're hearing one thing, your body language in some instances may be telling them that you're not really behind the idea, that you don't believe in it. And every idea is a fragile thing. So you have to present it from a point of view beyond the idea. It's like karate. You can break the board if you go beyond the board, if you think beyond the board. Well, it's the same with an idea. When the idea comes up, you have to then see that it has legs. An idea by itself, without application, is an interesting thing. But it has to have application and legs. And it has to be something that, if you make the investment in it, because that's usually what an idea means, somebody has to invest time, money, energy, effort, or their identity in it, that there's going to be a payoff. There's going to be a payday down the road. And it doesn't have to be a financial payday. It could be, in terms of what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I agree with that point, and that's quite good. Now, the old adage is "fake it till you make it," and but that kind of goes contrary to what you're saying, because what you're really saying is that you can speak with a degree of confidence, but it's also the other intangibles. And I've read some things varying, the percentage varies, but only like 10% of what you say is picked up of the total message. 90% is your body language, your posture, your eye movement. So isn't that true? You kind of really can't fake it. You got to kind of really believe in yourself.
Believing in yourself and believing in your idea is got to be the first step. And then the ability to translate that, because some people do believe in themselves, but they don't have the proper presentational, method. And so people walk away and say, I don't know, what do you think? Well, they shouldn't have to ask somebody else what they think. They should say, this guy's certain. She's perfect. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's in one with the idea. She's in concert with it. And because of that, you now have a foundation. Now people look to you and say they accept it wholesale or they don't. But they know if they do accept it, that you're the architect, you're the engineer, you're the one that's going to build it, you're the one that's going to deliver it, or supervise those aspects of it. And we miss a lot of that today. Yes, it's true that fake it till you make it is probably an adage that is still out there, but you can only fake it for so long. At some point, the rubber has to meet the road. At some point, you have to deliver. At some point, you have to be able to show progress. You have to be able to show a construct rather than a destruct. And the good news is that every time somebody does believe in an idea and does put weight to it, your experience grows, and your ability to do the next one is made richer by the past.
Tom, I think you have a very interesting perspective, because not only are you an idea person, but you also work in advertising, so you have an expertise in communicating those ideas. What has your experience been in terms of, I've seen many very talented individuals, inventors, extremely smart, and let's just say it's a venture fair, and they're looking for angel capital, angel investors. They present the idea, but it's kind of doesn't have a theme. There's no real, beginning, middle, end point. They get so immersed in the technology, the presentation lacks that this is the payoff, this is the benefit. Have you seen that in yourself? Not in yourself, but in your observations?
I think that's why they invented partners. I think most of the time when I've seen successful partnerships, it's the guy with the idea who's happy in a room with a soldering iron or working on a computer program, and then the guy who's the business guy who can say, this is the application. And you see what he's doing in there? It's crazy. I know. I don't know what he's doing either, but you can make $1 million. And the prospective angel only hears $1 million. But the guy in the room is never going to turn around and say that. The guy in the room is going to say, it has 15 megabytes of bandwidth capacity. And the guy with the money is like, great, you sound like my kid.
Yeah, exactly. I've actually been through this program. I interviewed a bunch of people, companies, potential companies, emerging companies at a Connecticut Venture Group fair. And many people are very articulate about their ideas and very compelling, and many of them we'll have on this show. However, one particular individual, I will not mention any names, I kind of asked him, gee, it's like an exciting technology. It had to do with, immunization and some other really very interesting aspects in the medical field. And he just went on. Literally, there was no stopping him. And I'm thinking, if he's in front of an investor or an angels seed
Sure.
person, it's not going to happen.
Well, you're 100% right. I think having an idea is wholly different than a business application.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, application is a key word. Applied science is a step towards industry. Science on its own is an observational endeavor, which can be theoretical, it could be proven, but you need that to span the gap from the knowledge to the application. And in that application, if there is a profitable or exploitable aspect, then business gets excited about it. And that's I don't know anyone who's been able to do it any other way. Now, sometimes there's that rare individual who can talk, bricks or bytes or bits or whatever, and then turn around from the other side of their head and speak in business terms and lay out, when ROI happens and talk about the investment process and what the flow of dough is and how the cash comes back to the company. And then, if they're really good, what's product number 2? Mm-hmm. And product number 3. And that goes back to the legs that we talked about. Sometimes, a great idea could suck up all of the investment capital, and many times a company could go at a loss to bring out the first of a series. But knowing that there's a deep bench, they don't mind because they know they're going to make it back because the second one's not going to be as expensive to make as the first because It's built on the first.
Makes sense. Now, 14 years old, inventor of a computer, and you're about to go to NBC. But before we get into that, why don't you introduce the first track? First, name what is the name of your group?
Oh, well, the name of this band is the Howling Thurstons.
And how'd you get to that name? I mean, that's a different. I know Thurston from Thurston Howell, like at Gilligan's Island. But how'd you get to that name?
Well, it's better than the Marauding Mariannes.
There you go. Yeah.
Or the Gentle Gingers. The Howling Thurstons. Actually, they got to me. I belong to a place in the city that's called a recreational health club for musicians, guys who used to play when they were kids, who now, have other things to do. And you can go there and you can plop down a couple of bucks and jam on a Saturday night. And I got to know some musicians. And one of the people in the Howling Thurstons, Peter, had an opportunity to work with me and said, "Hey, would you like to come over and try out? Our drummer's going on vacation or something, or whatever it was." And I said, "Sure." And we sat down and we played some stuff, and it was great. And I said, "Guys, I got to tell you, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. I'm a busy guy. Long story short, it's been a long time, and I look forward to it every week. If we can rehearse every week, it's just the most fantastic thing, of which is the gift of music. I mean, it's great to listen to, but if you can perform it, and more importantly, if you can perform it with 3 other people or 4 other people, there's a certain connection that happens. That's probably one of the few real magical things that I've experienced in my life. It's just unbelievably uncanny the way you can just know you're going to something and all of a sudden you hit a riff together and it's like you rehearsed it, and of course you didn't. Jazz musicians know this inside and out.
The improv of it.
The improv, but also there's this unspoken, again, back to unspoken language. There's something that passes around between musicians that's on another frequency that somehow or another doesn't get picked up by almost everybody, but the musicians have it.
But when it's good, I think the audience picks it up to some degree.
Oh, without a doubt. When it's good, the audience says, "Wow, I heard that."
Name of the band again, and what's the first title track?
Howling Thurstons, and I believe the first title track is, hold on. I wasn't in the mix session. The first title track is Dick Marmalade, everybody.
Dick Marmalade. Let's hear that, and we'll play that right now. Okay, that's pretty awesome. It's a Howling Thurstons, and that track
Dick Marmalade.
was Dick Marmalade. Pretty awesome. I don't know about this. It could be the next wave. You never know. Everything that's old is new again, so you never know.
Hey, listen, not that this is going to go into the broadcast, Hall of Fame, but that was the East Coast premiere of that song. I know it's been playing on the West Coast, but
that's what we like to do.
East Coast premiere.
That's what we like to do with our audience. This is the Business Buzz, WESU 88.1 FM in Middletown. My name's Jeff Sherman, and I have a special guest, Tom Avitabile from New York City, a writer, a producer, an advertising person, and a writer and potential movie maker.
Wow, what a list.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I was working on bikes, and I was playing, I'm sorry to say it's Connecticut, it was tackle football, and you were 14 years old, and you developed a computer, and now you're at NBC, correct?
Well, yeah, the computer got me in the door.
Okay, and I think
Quite
you have some
by
interesting
accident.
stories about NBC.
Well, yeah. I was, again, the opportunity of living in New York allowed me to, take a 15-cent subway ride down to Manhattan. And I had this computer, and it was in an attaché case. And again, this is 1967, folks. For all you in the engineering world, Texas Instruments was a year away from coming out with the 4-bit chip.
It's pretty much like BCAC. That's BC, correct?
Yeah, definitely BC.
Before computer.
But the computer was DC.
There you go.
Worked on battery. Anyway, so I built this thing in an attaché case, and it was, it was impressive. And I found out very early that if I walked in through the door that said authorized personnel only and walked into a computer room with gigantic IBM machines in it, that somebody was sure to, in a couple of minutes, say, "Get out of here, you're just a kid." And then I'd say, "Well, I built this computer." And they'd say, "What?" And I go, "Click, click," and I'd open this thing up, and they would see the future. And they embraced me every time.
This is at NBC.
No, this is in brokerage houses, Pan Am Airlines, Union Carbide, any place where there was a computer. And I got embraced by these people, and they gave me parts and equipment and books, and I even got a summer job once.
There you go.
So my MO was to go to an office building and press all the buttons on the elevator, and when the doors open, take a sniff for the specific smell of computer tape, which is made out of acetate, which is kind of a vinegary smell.
Tom, I have to ask you this. So you basically did, put the leather to the pavement, went around to these different office buildings and kind of seeked out your opportunity.
Yes.
And what I think is so interesting about that is so many people nowadays rely almost solely on the internet to get opportunities. I think that there has to be a healthy combination of both. What's your view on that? In other words, for looking for jobs, for looking for opportunities. If it's always remote, you need that connection.
I think at some point, you have to make a presentation. This goes back to our earlier discussion. At some point, you've got to stand in front of somebody, and they've got to take the measure of who you are. They've got to have a sense that. Don't forget, when you're talking about work, you're talking about something you're going to do in exchange for money. Mm-hmm. Whose money? Well, it's usually the money of the person that's hiring you. So, are you going to do it? And believe it or not, that's the basic question. It's not. It's almost irrelevant as to, what it is they're asking you to do. Will you show up? Will you pay attention? Will you not be on the internet? Will you not be playing solitaire? Will you be spending
So it's a
their
quintessential
money well?
Is it going to be the fit? That's always the biggest question.
Yeah, and today, unfortunately, I'm in a hiring circumstance all the time, and it's very hard to find people who have a work ethic that's worth paying for.
I know I've come across a lot of articles about that. Do you find that, in your hiring process, is there a difference at all? Can you make any conclusions from maybe older workers, let's say 40 and above, and some of the newer people or entries into the job market? Is there a difference? I've read some things that there's more a sense of entitlement and other things. Is that true, or just from your experience?
Entitlement? Well, yeah, there is a sense of entitlement. I think it's very hard nowadays to find someone who's fresh out of education, who understands that it's a long, hard slog to get to lunch.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And it's. I think it has to do with the fact that we're not stressing that anymore. I mean, in our half-hour television show, everything happens, and is resolved, and everyone's successful in a half hour, or comic circumstances ensue. Where else do you learn anything about life? You know, I mean, you mow the lawn maybe and you get some money, but nowadays, I guess a lot of the people that would come by my way, probably the parents hired somebody to mow the lawn. So what's really the experience that people have where they apply themselves and do it for something then you get money back for? And that's not really out there. I mean, intern programs try and foster that. And whenever I get an intern, you work them. I work them because not that they're slave labor. You work them and you make sure that they learn. You make sure that they walk out of there knowing something. And maybe what they learned the bigger lesson on isn't necessarily the ins and outs of advertising or production or whatever they came for, but they learn how to work with people. They learn how to show up. They learn how to dress. And believe me, that's a big thing. It's just, wow, you're going to wash your car or are you coming to work?
Yeah, it's actually kind of goes back to what you initially said about the whole impression that it's, a very small percentage of your communication is what you say. It's more how you look, how you present yourself, and that goes obviously into your dress.
I have a small aside story. I owned a business in the East End of Long Island, a post-production film and video business in Bridgehampton. And I had all the local stars that are out there, the Alec Baldwins and people like that, who would come to my place because they would do ADR, which is a part of a movie process where you replace dialogue. And of course, it was a very fashionable place to be and a very cool place to be because it was all computers and television, and we did stuff for Sex and the City and everything, and everybody wanted to kind of work there. And of course, you go to dinner with some people and say, "My son," and that's how it started, And eventually, it was a shining shoes moment because these kids didn't want to work. They just wanted to be there and hang out when the stars showed up. And in one such instance, this young man came to us, and he was, again, one of those recommendations. And I thought it was another shoe shining moment. And when I explained to him what needed to be done and how he had to be there at 9, he looked at me and said, 9? And I went, "Yeah, 9. He said, 9:30? And I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, I have to muck out the stables at 8. I said, "You're hired."
Excellent. Yes.
Well, if you can shovel, if you can shovel poop, you can work for me. And by the way, he was fantastic. I left him one day in the middle of a voiceover session. I think we had Roy Scheider was the talent, and it was just like his second day at the job. And I just got up and said, "Do the right thing. I got to catch the jitney." And he finished the show. He was fabulous. He went back to Harvard at the end of the summer, but he was fabulous talent. But he had a work ethic, and that's my point.
Yeah, I think you're right. When I'm in a hiring situation, I always look for someone. I'd much rather lean towards someone that worked their way through college, even if it took a couple years more than 4 years. If it took 6,
sure.
They pumped some gas, they shoveled some horse stuff, as you say.
Yeah.
But you have that work ethic, so that's important.
But that doesn't necessarily exclude people that had an easier road. It's just they have to be aware that the metrics change out of school. Whatever you did for your thesis, I think we did that last week. That amount of work, because that's due every week. And you don't get a lot of applause for it. And you don't get a cap and gown and you don't get a diploma. You get a paycheck. And that's, believe it or not, that's a very hard concept for a lot of people to get their heads around. And I'm usually the guy at 11:30 at night in the studio looking around saying, "Where are all the kids that are supposed to be here, breaking their rear ends while I go home?" I haven't found that yet. I know that's the kid I was. I was the last guy to leave the studio, lock up when I was a film sound mixer. And I was do anything to be there. Go get coffee, get sandwiches, clean out, a room or something, whatever I needed to do just to be in that environment. I'm looking around. I don't see anybody like that.
But you were that person. You're 14 years old with the computer invention, and then you went from there for other opportunities, and you had some experience at NBC. Tell the audience about that experience, and how old were you?
I was 15 years old. The Vietnam War was on. And I had, in those days, this is before Saturday Night Live, on a Saturday night, there was no one at NBC. What would happen is about 11 o'clock, the 3 executives that really ran the place on Saturday night went down to the local watering hole at the bottom of the building and, had some nightcaps. And it was okay because there's nothing really going on. There was an hour left to the end of the shift. And one night I was by myself and the phone rang, and it was a ham radio operator out of San Francisco using a phone patch, and he was connecting me to a cameraman who didn't work for NBC but was what we call a stringer, who was calling in from Saigon.
And you're 14 years old,
14
alone in a
years old.
booth,
Yes.
with a yellow phone, right?
Yeah, with a yellow phone.
Okay.
Well, the yellow phone, it was interesting. It was under the manager's desk, and it connected to the drinking booth at Hurley's, which was the bar on the corner
direct
of
patch,
6th Avenue. Direct patch. Pick it up in a ring. And the deal was that if something happened, anything happened, call on the phone, will come right up. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't even time to pick up the yellow phone because the ham radio operator was saying, I'm losing your signal, I'm losing your signal, I'm losing him. And what I made out through the static was, color reversal, communist insurgents, $50, $300. And I heard the $300 part. And I knew that this stringer was looking for what we call a purchase order to that he could sell us this film, which was a 50 feet of film on something that looked, on a spool, a daylight spool. And it was a news story about communist insurgents in Phnom Penh. And I said yes because we were losing him, and I had no authority to say yes. And when I picked up the yellow phone after the phone call was over, I played it like it was happening now. And I got the guys in the booth, and I said, I got a guy on the phone, and they're losing him fast. And And thank God, Bill Chesley said, okay, do it. He was the film manager at the time. And I went, phew, because $300 could have got me fired in those days.
Certainly.
It was a lot of money in those days, $300.
Especially for a 14-year-old.
Yeah, especially for a 14-year-old. Well, this guy was risking his life, shooting in a war zone for $300. That's how much money it was. So anyway, this became my little roll of film, and I was able to, we used to have telex in those days, or Twix and things like that, and I was able to track this little roll of film from Saigon. It eventually went to Orly Airport in France, where it got yellow bagged, which was actually a yellow webbed bag for NBC News that kind of had diplomatic immunity almost. And this little can of film went in that bag and then came to JFK. And it got to JFK about 1:30 in the morning on a Sunday. And I just stayed up all weekend. I was just so excited about this. This was my baby, And I watched it come in, and they put it in the developer up on the 9th floor, and I see the film going up and down through the loops and through the baths and everything. And then it came out. And the intention was, this was such a hot story, that they were going to lead on the Today Show with it. And at that time, it was Hugh Downs, Barbara Walters, Frank McGee. This was going to be the 7:01 lead story. It means 7 o'clock goes on the air, they do show side, then they throw it to news at 7:01. And I'm like so excited. And this thing comes out, and there's no real time to play with it. So they're using a view scope and a rewind, and it's coming out of the soup, literally, and they're winding it, and it's going through a scope, and there's a little screen, and it's shots of war. It's shots of, communists coming over the line and all that stuff. But there's one little segment. Is a little patrol of American soldiers, 3, 4, 5 guys. And they're walking, and all of a sudden the camera does a vibration and moves and falls and everything else, and there's this pink cloud. Not to get too graphic, but when the camera finally rights itself, it looked like a butcher shop. And I'd never seen that before in my life. And this was in color. And it was devastating to see.
Yeah, at that age, seeing it for the first time and basically on the air, you'd never get that kind of footage on network TV at all anyway.
Well, that was the point. And what happened at that next moment was historic in some ways and common in others. The editor went, whoops, and he rolled back the film, and he snipped the piece about the GI stepping on the landmine and the 3 guys that died at that second that I watched. He snipped it. And I asked, why'd you do that? And he said, well, you can't show that to some lady in Nebraska eating her cornflakes. And at the time, being 14, and these were adults, I went, well, I guess that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And then what he did, which was astounding, was he clipped it to a big reel. Remember like in school when they had the old films, big brown reel? That was a loaded reel of gore. They called it the gore reel. And it was all of these excerpts, from films of guys getting shot, I guess, and blown up and all this stuff. For the dark side, that scratched the itch, dark side that, is in all of us, I guess, at some level. Anyway, so there was the gore reel. Well, during the week, I started thinking about this. And I realized what I saw right there was the sanitization of the war.
That still goes on today, I'm sure.
I'm sure at some level it does. Mm-hmm. So I hatched a plan. My plan was to stop the Vietnam War.
You're 14 years old. Okay, I'll give you the computer, but stopping the war might be a little...
To be accurate, I was 15 and a half. But my plan was to go back the following weekend and steal the reel and take it to PBS, which in those days was Channel 13 WNET, which I thought was the only place I could go because I felt that, that was government-owned or something. I don't know what I was thinking, but I just figured that would be it. So my plan, in a James Bond sense, was go steal the reel. And, of course, when I got up to the 9th floor and the reel was gone, and my opportunity had passed. But I am sure that had we shown that reel,
it would have had a major impact.
I would think people would demand the end of the war, because we had done that. We were doing MIAs and KIAs like ball scores. I mean, the reports, it's hard for people to remember this, but it was like, this week the MIA and the KIA was the second lowest seasonally adjusted for blah, blah, blah. Next week will be an all-new time high. It was like we were watching ball scores.
Pretty impressive at that age. Very good. You had some excellent early experience. Unfortunately, a lot better and more interesting experience than I did when I was a teenager. I think
yet I'm on your show.
I'm honored. Amazing. So we're going to talk a little bit more about your more current experience, advertising, documentary development, and some of the other things, including your band. But before we do, let's play another clip from your new album, and it's called The Howling Thurstons. And I believe
Road Rage. It's called. I get to be a DJ now. Hey, everybody, we got Road Rage and Other Acts of Unprovoked Violence.
There we go.
The name of the album.
We are going to play Road Rage as we speak. There we go. I hope you enjoyed that clip. The name of the group is the Howling Thurstons, and that was Road Rage. And we have an exciting special guest from New York. Tom, welcome back.
By the way, someone, we just had someone come in and say, What do you do in that band?
He plays the drums, and he's damn good at it. In fact, why don't you tell the listeners of the story about that you used to emulate a drummer when you were a youth, and tell us about that, about his ratings versus yours.
What happened was, and he's a wonderful drummer. His name is Sandy Nelson, and somebody may remember him out there. Most people probably wouldn't. He had a couple of hits in the 60s, most notably one called Drums A Go-Go. That tells you how long ago that was. Let There Be Drums. Fabulous drummer. And he made a kind of a meat and potatoes business out of taking all the popular songs for the next 10 years and making drum-forward versions of them. Mm-hmm. So songs people would be singing, he'd be banging out different rhythms to. And, of course, someone I emulated by playing a record and playing along with it. Anyway, it just so happens we were reviewed in California a couple of weeks ago. We got a really great review, and we got 4 stars. And I happened to notice that Sandy Nelson, and God bless him, he's still alive. I didn't expect that. He had a new album, and he got 3 stars.
So maybe you can just send him a quick note. Thanks for the inspiration. And I've got 4 stars, and we'll leave the rest alone. Okay, right now you're in New York City. You're working in an ad agency. This is the Business Buzz, WESU FM 88.1 in Middletown. I'm Jeff Sherman. We have a special guest from New York City. Ken, could you tell the listeners and maybe shed a little light on, there's a lot of confusion. What goes into a good ad, and what's some of the things that you should avoid? I mean, because there's a lot of advertising out there and very few is effective.
I have to take a little issue with your premise that very few is effective. The vast majority of advertising is effective. Mm-hmm. It's just not effective in a way that excites us. Like good police work, it ain't like the TV show. Like, and good advertising ain't like, the award winners. I mean, when you think of Procter & Gamble, when you think of the millions and millions and millions and millions of products that are sold daily, the awareness of those products is advertising working the engine. I mean, that's what it does. So, and because advertising is so expensive, if it didn't work, it wouldn't be there. So, but I know your point, but I just wanted to make that as a general baseline for the discussion. Your point is, why is it so much of it unimaginative? Why is so much of it, in some ways disconnected from the product? And that is a challenge for the advertising business. There were 2 aspects to advertising. One is getting the account, and the second is keeping the account. And you can almost trace, on a chart, advertising that comes out of getting the account as opposed to advertising that comes out of keeping the account. And they're vastly different. Holding and maintaining market share and keeping awareness up and keeping a brand name at top of mind is a wholly different task than what most people endeavor to do in the first time, because that first time out of the box for an agency, they have to make their bones. They have to, impress people. They have to have people talking. Admittedly, no one talks about the Procter & Gamble commercial. No one talks about the latest dishwashing liquid commercial, unless they do something really outrageous. But they buy the product.
So what you're saying is that to get the account, you may have a more creative approach, more of a fizzle, and then as you progress and you're looking at actually the bottom line dollar figures, what the advertising is for, you get a lot less glamorous, but possibly more effective.
Yeah, and I think that's true of most things in life. I think it's a human dynamic that every date's not the first date. If I can go that far. But that doesn't mean that it's a bad relationship. Mm-hmm. And the same issue holds true in advertising. So there's a little bit of separation there. Also, the other thing that's happened, and I know this is one of the things we were talking about earlier, advertising has changed. But advertising hasn't changed in a vacuum. Advertising has changed because media has changed. And I have a fantasy. I've got to find out if this is true or not. But my history being in NBC, I was regaled with stories about the red and the blue network in the old days when it was just radio, and General Sarnoff ruled NBC with a firm hand. And the whole reason for NBC was to sell RCA radios. People would buy RCA radios. That's why they had Milton Berle and Jack Benny. And my fantasy is, and it may be true, that the Jack Benny program brought to you by Jell-O, which was great. It was wonderful. Jell-O is a wonderful thing, except when the NBC went coast to coast, people in the West Coast said, "What's Jell-O?" And my fantasy goes that the owner of the Jell-O company is on a trip, playing golf, in the West Coast. And somebody says, "Yeah, I heard about that. What's Jell-O?" And he realizes he's getting coverage, but there's no product. So he comes back and he says, "Get some guys out there with some boxes to start selling some
So they
Jell-O."
were not selling Jell-O in the West Coast.
It wasn't in my fantasy. It wasn't a national brand, but because the coverage went there, suddenly they created a market, which is where marketing comes from. So you're getting coverage. People are aware of your product. Now all you got to do is get the product to the market and let them buy it. Now that's a fantasy construct, but it shows where advertising really is. Advertising creates a demand for a product. The product has to be good. The adage is, nothing kills a bad product faster than good advertising, because people try it once and they hate it. If it's a good product and the advertising is good, well, that's the best of all possible worlds.
So they have to be in sync. I mean, you can only dress something up so far. I think back maybe even to the auto industry in the 70s. They might have had slick ads, but the product really wasn't up to snuff with other competitors from, let's just say, Japan or Germany.
Well, I think maybe somebody from BBD&O might tell you in the old days, copy-intensive stuff. I mean, that was the rule. I mean, if you look at Life magazines, if you see these on the street, you buy them, or somebody brings you one for your birthday because it's the year you were born, and the Hindenburg is on it. You're old. But anyway, if you open it up, you see these ads are mostly copy-intensive. People read back then. They actually did read, and the copy was the thrust of advertising. Today, the copy is down to a 2-second soundbite.
That's to do probably because people don't read as much, plus attention spans are basically
again,
nothing.
The media has changed. We went through a whole shock period of the MTV commercial, where every commercial was quick cut. Nothing could last more than 14 frames, and there had to be 67 cuts in a commercial by scientific methodology, and the music must be phonetic, and it doesn't matter if it talks about the product or not, as long as at the end you put the logo.
Just to get attention, really.
Well, it was advertising trying to meet the phenomenon and being part of the phenomenon, which in that days was MTV and quick cutting videos. The reason why videos quick cut was because they didn't have enough money, or they didn't have enough knowledge of film and all. These were very experimental things, or crazy things, but it became the way people like to get their information. So advertising acceded to that, and we had all these MTV-style commercials. And for a while, there was jingles. Everybody was singing. And then after a while, it was all real people testimonial. And then after that, there was another wave that came in. So it kind of goes in waves. And it's all people trying to read the tea leaves. It's all people trying to understand, if we do this, more people will remember our product name. And, of course, that's the worst thing that can happen in advertising, when it's a great commercial, but you don't know who it's for. And that's where I go back to the vast majority of it is effective. Classic stuff, the Alka-Seltzer commercials from years ago, and again, I'm speaking ancient history. I think it was "Can't Believe I Ate the Whole Thing," or
the Plop Plop Fizz Fizz. Yeah,
well, Plop Plop Fizz Fizz was the answer, but they had the thing, "I Can't Believe I Ate the Whole Thing." And if I'm getting my advertising history right, everybody loved the commercial. It won awards. It was shown on TV, even shown for free because it was so funny. Except nobody knew it was Alka-Seltzer, and the reason was because Alka-Seltzer was being sold as a hangover remedy. And the vast majority of people who are familiar with Alka-Seltzer knew it from, that's what you have the morning after, man.
So there's a disconnect between it wasn't placed as something you'd do to remedy indigestion. It was a hangover, and they probably might have stuck with that better. Now, being in advertising now, obviously technology has changed, and I'm quite fascinated with this whole internet marketing and internet advertising, the YouTubes and stuff. In fact, I heard something that Barack Obama, there's a new buzz out because there's some rap song about him. As an advertiser, what's your view on that, and do you incorporate into your marketing and advertising plans?
My view is Barack Obama's rap song or jingle?
No, the use of these different technologies.
Well, again, advertising only responds to the media marketplace, because at the end of the day, that's all we have as a megaphone, whether it's a newspaper or affinity advertising or social advertising on websites, whether it's direct placement in film or television, or if it's paid for placement like commercials or infomercials, which we're doing a lot with infomercials. And interestingly enough, we're having some great success with infomercials towards the Hispanic market, which, was kind of like a combination idea that came in, and it's being tremendously successful. So there are a number of arrows in that quiver. As it relates to internet, there's a shock going on in advertising. And the shock is that people are underestimating the power of the internet. At the same time, people are over-exaggerating the internet's capabilities. And I remember, not too long ago, being at a meeting that said, the internet is a $0 million business on its way to becoming a $0 billion business. And if you let that sink in for a minute, you'll see what it was all about. Most of the people that have made money on the internet and done it well are using the internet merely as a means of conveyance or a conduit to sell product. Your Amazons, your eBay, and all that kind of stuff. The business model is based on the fact that let the computers do it, not pay people. But the internet as itself is a resource for people. So you have to, once again, the way people watch it was beautiful in the old days when there was 3 networks, everybody had to watch one of the 3. So if you bought 3 commercials at 9 o'clock, everybody watching television saw your commercial. Now media is so fractionalized and so pigeonholed, and because of not only internet but networks now, cable networks, I'm sure you've heard of the History Channel and the Learning Channel and all those channels, they are now taking on the traditional roles that we used to ascribe to radio. Radio, you listen to one station. People listen to a station on radio. On television, they watch programming. Mm-hmm. That was the old rule. So where you could buy a classical station and know you're reaching a certain type of individual, there might only be one show that appeals to that individual on a network. So television, you bought programming. And for demographic or psychographic, you bought radio. Now, the internet can create so many little niches and so many little areas and affinity groups and social advertising networks that the dollar kind of falls apart. And we're going through this right now. We are totally in a modality right now to retool advertising with separate, distinct messages to separate affinity groups. And the jury's still out on this because it's kind of like works in contrast to the main principle of the Jell-O guy who said, I'm paying for this and I'm getting more people who know my product and I'm paying once. So we're going from broadcast back to narrow catch. Now I've got to take fractions of dollars that may not be as efficiently spent as they can be in broadcast when everybody was watching 3 and subdivide it 27, 30, 40 different ways so you can't have impact in any one area. And what I mean that the jury's out is people are still playing with these formulas to try and decide if at the end of the day you can do Procter & Gamble P&G numbers in a fractionalized
yeah, that makes sense versus like shotgun versus a sniper approach. And now it's very difficult. There's a lot of forces that are going against, if you will, the old traditional shotgun approach. Now you're in advertising and been very successful at that. Can you tell our listening audience an ad that you're really proud of and something that was effective or you thought was very creative? I know there's a lot of them, but if you could pick one that you're kind of really hold.
And then I wrote, it's always the one you're going to do next is the one you love the most. But I had a nice experience a couple of weeks ago. I went into a creative meeting, and they were all about, let's just do simple, let's just do plain, let's not complicate it, let's keep it simple, let's make it very stark, let's keep it very bare. And, they used every adjective they could. And I totally turned around, stood up and said, how about this? And I stood up and I acted out the commercial. And they said, yeah, great. And it had nothing to do with anything they said.
So they were going on a completely different path and you kind of jazzed it up.
Well, I had an idea. And again, going back to having an idea, I stood up and I sold it. And I did the commercial pretty much word for word the way it airs now today. Mm-hmm. And I scoped it out for them. I played air guitar. I painted the whole thing. And when they said yes, what they were saying yes to was the fact that I told them for the same amount of effort that they were going to put behind the bare bones, plain vanilla approach, that I can give them something resonating with the market that was in sync with their current advertising trends, that captured the market at the moment of decision, which is not what they were doing previously. They were talking after the moment of decision. I was in the moment of decision, and I was in the environment that they were already spending dollars to be in. And I was utilizing that. So I was taking advantage of what they'd already done and capitalizing on that.
Excellent. Now, beyond advertising, you also have produced some very interesting documentaries over the years. One of them in particular that I thought was fascinating was having to deal with life satisfaction, career satisfaction. Could you briefly describe that to the audience? Because I found that very interesting.
Yes, I did a series called When I Grow Up, and I had some Emmy action on that too, which is kind of nice. But When I Grow Up was essentially career-oriented education. McDonald's was being slammed by the Congress and the PTA in the first George Bush administration. They were called Ready to Learn Sinners. He had a Ready to Learn program. Kids have to show up at school ready to learn. Mm-hmm. And McDonald's was being painted with a brush that said they were a sinner, which means they're on somebody's bad list. So when they needed to do something in the public interest and they needed to put some attention to this, they went with my idea, which was When I Grow Up, which essentially was brought to you by McDonald's, but it was successful adults saying, when I was a kid, I loved playing with models and building things. Now I'm an architect. It's the same stuff. I had an airline pilot who went through 5 different careers and got back to what she loved, which was when she was a kid, she was running with, in a field and loving birds and using an umbrella and trying to pull a Mary Poppins. She went through a whole circuitous route in 25 years of her life and then decided she was going to fly. And people said, oh, that's silly. You can't be a stewardess. And she said, I'm not going to be a stewardess. I want to be a captain. 2 years later, that little girl was flying a 350,000-pound plane.
And the huge takeaway of that was,
if you find something as a grown-up that resonates to that which you loved as a child, you will be successful and happy.
Hear that, audience? I think that's good advice. Very few people have the opportunity to do that. Now, before we leave, you're also, I believe, working on a movie idea. Would you like to share that with the audience?
Oh, this is great. Did I pay for this time? Yeah, let me give it to you real quick. Using my understanding of marketing and how advertising works, it came to me that there's a major portion, and again, we're having success in this area right now, there's a major portion of America that's not being addressed from the entertainment mainstream, and that is the Hispanic market. I have a movie that deals with 2 guys in Mexico who would be small characters in anybody else's movie. They're the heroes of our movie. And it's funny. It's kind of like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, if you saw that. And it's like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels meets Traffic. That's a Hollywood pitch, by the way. That's the way they do it. Anyway, so the idea is that these 2 fellas come across $20 million. Comic circumstances ensue. Double cross, triple cross, quadruple cross happens. You don't know who's got what. It's a good story. But the idea is to shoot it bilingual. And bilingual shooting means 2 scripts, means that wherever there's idiosyncratic differences between languages or cultures or things that aren't culturally correct, to address those in the scripting phase. So that when we go to shoot the film, we literally are shooting 2 films at once. We shoot a scene in English, and when the camera's set up, because that's the most expensive part, lighting, setup, and everything, rehearsal. Shoot it in English, done. Shoot it in Spanish, same angle, same thing. Use all bilingual actors.
And the story can still be coherent in both languages.
Exactly, except the jokes that don't work when you translate them work because they've been transliterated, not just translated.
Tom, I've thoroughly enjoyed our discussion. This is Business Buzz 88.1 WESU in Middletown. Are you going to please make a promise and come back and visit us once again? I think our listeners found your information very interesting and compelling as well. And we're going to leave with the Howling Thurstons. Tom, thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, Jim.